My father-in-law walked me down the aisle. Not because it was sentimental. Not because we had some special bond built over years of Sunday dinners and long conversations. He walked me down the aisle because the two people who were supposed to be there, the two people who had raised me, who had watched me take my first steps and sat through my school concerts and signed my report cards, had decided that a 3-hour drive from Sudbury to Toronto was simply too far. But 8 months earlier, they had flown to Vancouver. I need you to sit with that for a second, because I still think about it every time I drive past a highway sign. They flew from Sudbury to Vancouver, 5 hours in the air, a connection through Calgary, 2 checked bags, and a hotel for 4 nights for my brother's housewarming party. Not a wedding, not a graduation. A housewarming party for the new condo my brother had bought with his girlfriend. And when I called my mother 3 weeks before my wedding and asked her to confirm she and my father were still coming, she said, and I quote, "Sweetheart, the drive is a lot. Your father's knee has been acting up." I said, "Mom, it's 3 hours." She said, "Well, we'll see how he feels." They didn't come. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how I spent 15 years being the invisible daughter and what happened 11 weeks after my wedding day. I'm 31 now. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, the oldest of 2 kids. My brother, who I'll call by his role my brother, is 4 years younger than me. He's 27, works in tech sales in Vancouver, and has, for as long as I can remember, been the son that my parents orbited around. I don't say that bitterly. I used to. I spent a lot of years saying it bitterly into the phone to my best friend, or typing it out in journal entries I never finished. But now I say it the way you'd read a weather report. It's just what the climate was in our house. When my brother was in high school, my parents drove 4 hours round trip every second weekend to watch him play rep hockey. When I was in high school and made the honor roll 3 years in a row, my mother framed one certificate and put it in the hallway by the basement door. When my brother decided not to go to university and instead do a 2-year college program in business administration, my parents told everyone at Christmas dinner that he was being smart, taking the practical route. When I got accepted to the nursing program at Laurentian University, which, by the way, is a competitive program, my father said, "Well, just make sure you're okay with the hours." I paid for my nursing degree myself. Student loans, OSAP, a part-time job at a grocery store, and a summer job 2 years in a row at a fly-in fishing camp 3 hours north of the city. I graduated with just under $40,000 in debt and a degree I had earned entirely on my own. My parents paid for my brother's 2-year program, tuition, books, and his rent. I never said anything. I know people reading this, or listening to this, are already asking why. Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I push back? I've spent a lot of hours with a therapist in the past 2 years unpacking that exact question. And the honest answer is that when you grow up being told, in 100 small and invisible ways, that your needs are secondary, you stop thinking of yourself as someone whose needs matter. It becomes background noise. You adapt. You find other ways to feel okay. You get good grades, you work hard, you build your own life, and you tell yourself that you don't need them anyway. And then they don't come to your wedding, and you realize you did need them. You just didn't know it until that exact moment. I met my husband at work. He's a paramedic, steady and quiet, in the way that people who spend their working hours in crisis tend to be. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, and started planning a wedding for the following September. Small 80 people, a venue in the East End of Toronto, dinner and dancing, nothing elaborate. My parents were invited, obviously. So was my brother, who said he'd come, and then 4 weeks before the date, told me his girlfriend had a work event that weekend, and he wasn't sure he could make it. He didn't come either. But I'm getting ahead of myself. About 7 months before the wedding, my father-in-law sat me down at his kitchen table in Hamilton and told me something I was not prepared to hear. He told me that he had set up a registered education savings plan in my name, not my husband's. Mine back when my husband and I first got serious, because he said he could see I was the kind of person who builds things, and he wanted to make sure I had something to build with. I didn't understand at first. I said, "An RESP?" Those are for children's education. He smiled and said, Not always. It can be structured as a family RESP with an adult beneficiary if it was originally opened under certain conditions. I opened this one 11 years ago when your husband was in his early 20s. He was the original beneficiary. But he didn't end up using it, and when he told me he was going to marry you, I had it updated. I asked him how much was in it. He told me. I had to ask him to repeat the number. He had been contributing to that account for over a decade. With investment growth and compound returns, the balance was significant enough to pay off the remainder of my student loan entirely, with enough left over for a down payment on a house. I sat in that kitchen for a long time, without saying anything. My father-in-law poured me a cup of tea and didn't push me to talk. That's the thing about him, he's never once pushed. He just makes space and waits. I eventually asked him why he hadn't just given it to my husband. He said, Because your husband doesn't need it the way you do. And because generosity should go where it's needed, not where it's convenient. I cried on the drive home. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind where your body doesn't know what else to do with something. I didn't tell my parents about any of this. I want to be clear about that, because it matters later. My parents did not know about my father-in-law's account. They didn't know about my financial situation in any real detail. They knew I had student debt because I had mentioned it once at Thanksgiving, and my mother had said, Well, everyone has debt these days, and changed the subject. What my parents did know was that my father-in-law was doing well. He had retired early after selling a small manufacturing business he'd built over 30 years. He lived in a nice house in Hamilton. He drove a reasonable car, but took good vacations. My mother had made comments the kind that you're not supposed to notice, but you always do about how lucky I was to be marrying into that family. The wedding was in September. 80 people. My father-in-law walked me down the aisle, and honestly, it was one of the most meaningful moments of the entire day. He squeezed my hand before we started walking, and whispered, You deserve every good thing. I held it together until I got to the front, and then I cried again, and my husband cried, and half the room cried, so at least I wasn't alone in it. My parents had RSVP'd yes. Their 2 seats at the family table sat empty all night. My brother had told me 2 weeks prior he wasn't coming. My parents called me the morning of the wedding. My mother said my father's knee was really not good, and that they were so sorry, and they would celebrate with us soon. I said okay. I hung up the phone. My maid of honor handed me my bouquet and said, Their loss. I nodded and went and got married. They didn't call that evening. They didn't text. I got a card in the mail 9 days later with a grocery store gift card inside for $50. The card said, Congratulations on your special day. Wishing you both all the happiness. My husband's aunt cried harder at our reception than anyone, and she had only met me 4 times. For about 3 weeks after the wedding, I was in what I can only describe as a grief fog. Not about the wedding itself, the wedding was beautiful, and I was happy, and I meant every word I said, but about the realization that had been sitting just below the surface for 31 years and had finally broken through. My parents were not going to change. They were never going to see me the way they saw my brother, and that wasn't going to improve with time, or patience, or giving them more chances. That was just who they were. During those 3 weeks, something else was happening that I didn't know about. My parents, it turned out, had been having serious financial trouble for about 2 years. My father had been laid off from his job at a mining services company when I was 28, and while he'd found contract work, it wasn't consistent. They had taken out a home equity line of credit on the house in Sudbury. They had also, and I only found out about this later, borrowed money from my father's sister, my aunt, who had been quietly helping them make ends meet. My aunt is a straight-talking woman who has never once sugarcoated anything in her life. She is also, as it happens, the person who called me 11 weeks after my wedding. She called on a Tuesday evening in late November, while I was on the couch eating leftovers and watching something I no longer remember. She asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes, and then she told me something that made me set down my bowl and sit very still. She told me that my parents had told my brother, and only my brother, about their financial situation, and that my brother, rather than helping them directly, had suggested they reach out to my father-in-law, through my parents, to ask him for a loan. She had found out because she had overheard part of a phone call between my father and my brother, while she was visiting for Thanksgiving. She said she had sat on it for 3 weeks trying to decide what to do, and finally she had decided I needed to know. I asked her to confirm what she was saying, because I needed to hear it out loud twice. She confirmed it. My parents, who had not come to my wedding, who had sent me a $50 grocery store gift card, who had never once asked me how I was managing my student debt, never once offered to help, never once treated my life with the same weight they gave my brothers. Those parents were planning to leverage my marriage, to ask my father-in-law for money. They were going to go to him, presumably as my parents, presumably invoking some sense of family obligation, and ask him for financial help, without telling me, without asking me, without once considering that maybe, possibly, the daughter they had spent 30 years deprioritizing might have some thoughts about that. I got off the phone with my aunt, and I sat there for a long time. Then I called my husband. Then I called my father-in-law. My father-in-law listened to everything I told him. He asked 2 or 3 clarifying questions. Then he said very calmly, "Have they contacted me?" "No." "Will I be lending them money?" "No." "Is there anything you need from me right now?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "Take your time." I took 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, I did several things. I spoke to a financial advisor about the RESP account and confirmed the timeline for accessing it. The funds were available. I made an appointment with a mortgage broker to understand what a down payment would actually look like in the Toronto market. I also, and I want to be honest about this because it matters to the full picture, I spoke to my therapist 3 times. She helped me understand something important. She said, "You're not in crisis. You're in clarity. Those feel similar, but they're different. Clarity is when you finally see something accurately after a long time of seeing it wrong. It's uncomfortable, but it's not an emergency." She was right. I wasn't panicking. I was just, finally, completely clear. I called my parents on a Saturday morning in December. My father answered. I told him I had heard through my aunt that they were having financial difficulties, and that I was concerned. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said yes. Things had been tight, but they were managing. I said, "I also heard that you and my brother discussed approaching my father-in-law for help." Longer silence. He said, "We were just talking about options." I said, "I want you to know that is not an option. My father-in-law is not a resource for our family to draw on. He is my husband's father. He is kind to me because he is a kind person, not because he has any obligation to your financial situation." My father started to say something about family and how things are hard right now, and how he didn't think I would begrudge them for exploring their options. I let him finish. Then I said, "I'm also going to be honest with you about something. I need you to understand what it meant to me that you weren't at my wedding. Not as a guilt trip. I just need you to know that it happened, and that I noticed, and that it changed something for me." My father said they were sorry about that it had been a hard year. I said, "I know. I also had a hard year. I've been paying off a $40,000 student loan for 6 years while working full-time as a nurse, and planning a wedding largely on my own. I don't say that to compare. I say it because I want you to see me. I want you to actually see me." He didn't say anything. I said, "I love you. I'm not cutting you off. But I need some space right now, and I need you to respect that." I got off the phone and exhaled. In January, I accessed the RESP funds. The paperwork took about 3 weeks to process, and my father-in-law and I worked with a financial planner to structure the withdrawal in the most tax-efficient way. The full amount paid off my remaining student loan balance, just over $22,000 in one payment. I cried when the online account updated to 0. I took a screenshot, and I still have it. The remaining balance went into a first home savings account, which is a registered account in Canada that lets you save up to $40,000 tax-free toward a first home purchase. My husband and I are not first-time buyers yet, we rent, so the timing was right. We're planning to use it for a down payment within the next 18 months. I also did one more thing. I set up a monthly automatic contribution to a bursary fund through the Ontario Nurses Association Foundation. It's not large, $100 a month, but it goes toward emergency financial support for nursing students who are at risk of dropping out due to financial hardship. I set it up in honor of my own path and in the name of my father-in-law, who showed me what it looks like when someone decides to invest in a person just because they believe in them. He cried when I told him. He tried not to, but he did. As for my parents, I did not cut them off. I want to be clear about that too, because I think people sometimes expect these stories to end with a door slamming and a phone blocked and a clean break. Mine didn't. I still talk to my parents. We speak maybe once a month. The conversations are different now, shorter, more surface level, but honest in a way they never used to be. My father's knee, by the way, is fine. He went cross-country skiing with my brother in Whistler in February. I found out through my aunt. My brother and I have not spoken since the wedding. That was his choice more than mine. I think he knows that I know about the conversation with my parents regarding my father-in-law, and rather than address it, he's opted for distance. I've decided to let him have it. My parents never did approach my father-in-law. Whether they thought better of it on their own, or whether my December phone call made it clear that I would know if they tried, I don't know. They are still managing their finances as best they can. My aunt told me in February that they had worked out a repayment plan with the line of credit and were doing okay. I was glad to hear it. I mean that genuinely. What I keep coming back to, the thing that I find myself thinking about when I'm driving to work or lying awake at 3 in the morning, is how long I waited for them to see me. Not for them to prefer me over my brother. I let go of that wish a long time ago. But just to be seen, to have them look at my life and recognize that I had built something real, that I had worked hard, that I had earned the things I had, that I was a whole person whose milestones deserved to be shown up for. I waited 31 years. My father-in-law saw it without me ever having to ask. There's something about being witnessed by someone who has no obligation to you, someone who could have kept their resources and their attention elsewhere, but chose, voluntarily, to show up, that rearranges something in your chest. It doesn't undo 31 years of background noise and visibility, but it does prove that it was never about what I deserved. It was about what they were able to give. And my parents, for all their love, and I do believe they love me, in the way that people love their children, even when they don't know how to show it equally, could only ever give me what they had. And what they had was always, somehow, already allocated to someone else. I'm working on forgiving that. My therapist says forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying it. I'm not there yet, but I'm lighter than I was. My husband and I are looking at houses in Hamilton, actually, close to his father. Last month, my father-in-law and I started a tradition. Sunday afternoon, I drive over, and he makes tea, and we sit at the kitchen table and talk about whatever, the news, work, something I'm reading. Just an hour, sometimes less. Nothing structured. Last Sunday, he said, out of nowhere, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you." I asked him what he was proud of. He thought about it and said, "Everything, really. But mostly the way you handled a hard year, without letting it make you hard." I told him that was the best thing anyone had ever said to me. He nodded like that didn't surprise him, and poured me more tea. If you're watching this and you see yourself in any part of what I went through, the invisible daughter, the one whose milestones happen quietly, the one who keeps showing up for people who can't quite bring themselves to show up for you, I want you to hear this. Being seen by the right person at the right time can change the math entirely. And sometimes the right person isn't the one you've been waiting on.